I'll never forget what Deb said to me. She said, look, the worst thing that could ever happen to me happened to me. My son died. The second worst thing is that the world forget about him. So if your book makes that less likely, then it has to be a good thing. She's like, you've always told me over the years that I know my body best, and I'm telling you I'm in pain. And finally, when she kept pushing, she said, why won't you give me what I'm asking for? And I remember saying to her, I said, because medicine can't heal a broken heart. He picked up his son and held him after he had died. And the thing that he always told me was that he actually had a mirror so he could see himself holding his son. He doesn't have to work at all to remember that image. Life feels really short and feels very precarious. There's no guarantees about tomorrow. And so I tend not to put things off. And also I tend, or at least try not to leave things unsaid.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Broken Beautiful Me, where we gather in our sacred space for honest conversations and soul-deep healing. Today, I am so fortunate to have as my guest, Robert Macauley. He is one of only a few hundred physicians in the United States to focus on pediatric palliative care. His memoir, Because I Knew You, How Some Remarkable Sick Kids Healed a Doctor's Soul, is the first book to share the stories of children receiving palliative care and shows that palliative care is more about how you live than how you die. In addition to the kids' powerful stories, the memoir also reveals how their courage, as well as their parents, changed his life by healing deep wounds from his own childhood. Dr. Macauley is also an Episcopal priest, and the memoir grapples with how a loving God could allow kids to suffer and even die. He lives with his wife, 4 kids, and 2 rescue dogs in Portland, Oregon. Welcome, Robert. It's so nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Kelly.
So your memoir, it offers such a raw and honest reflection on your life and your work. So what compelled you to put your story into words and share it?
Well, it was about 6 years ago, and I had been reading some really beautiful memoirs about adults receiving palliative care that were very moving. And I thought to myself, there's really not any book out there that talks about kids receiving palliative care. And a few patients that I've taken care of over the years came to mind. And then the next day, a few more patients came to mind. And then I started making a list, and I felt like this has some energy behind it. And so I reached out to the parents of the kids that I had thought of, those that I was still in touch with, most of the ones in the book. And all but one, when I said, hey, I'm thinking about writing something, what do you think about this? All but one said, sure, this would be a good experience. And so we had these very powerful Zoom calls, sometimes a couple hours at a time, where we remembered their child and the time that we had spent together, oftentimes many years before. And then I reconnected with them once I wrote the chapter to make sure that I got things as right as I could. And then it came to the point where I was trying to find a publisher, which was not an easy thing. Let's just put it that way. A book about kids who mostly don't survive is not exactly what most publishers are yearning for. And I'm a pretty stubborn person, so I was not going to give up, but I definitely wasn't going to give up after a conversation I had with one of my favorite patient's parents, and he died when he was 19. And I said to her, like I said to all the parents, I said, you can stop at any point, right up until the day of publication. If this doesn't feel right to you, just tell me and I won't include that chapter, because like first rule of medicine, right? First, do no harm. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget what Deb said to me. She said, look, the worst thing that could ever happen to me happened to me. My son died. The second worst thing is that the world forget about him. So if your book makes that less likely, then it has to be a good thing. And as soon as she finished saying that, I remember thinking, well, there ain't any giving up now, not after that. And so fortunately, it saw the light of day.
That's so beautiful. And as a bereaved parent myself, that is one of the things that that you do carry with you, is that you don't want people to forget your beautiful child. Oh, that's so powerful. Um, so you write about these relationships that you build with the children and their families. Um, t- just take our listeners through kind of what it was like for you to be a palliative care physician for children.
Well, I didn't start off that way. It was a bit of a meandering path. And so I trained as a pediatrician and worked as a primary care or acute care pediatrician for a few years. And then I felt like I had found my place in the world of clinical ethics because also being an Episcopal priest, I had done some academic work in ethics. And I thought to myself, this is where I'm going to do my career. And there were a couple of problems with that. One is that ethics is pretty cerebral. You analyze issues, and it doesn't have a whole lot to do with kids because most ethical issues or ethics consults have to do with adults, and I missed treating kids. So I started exploring palliative care, which is a pretty new concept in pediatrics. To give you a sense of that, I trained at a pretty good place in my residency in the 1990s. And I don't think I heard the word palliative in 3 years of residency. Like, I don't mean to say we didn't have a team. I mean, we didn't talk about it. And so it's a gradual recognition that while no child should ever suffer and certainly shouldn't die, despite our best efforts, that can happen. And they deserve the same high level of care that adults get at the end of their life as well. And so I kind of tried to figure it out on my own. I didn't do formal training. I read a ton of stuff. I went to a lot of conferences. I made a lot of friends who I could call. They were on my speed dial to say, hey, what do I do now? Who had a lot more experience than I do, or I did at the time. And eventually realized that that was really where my heart was, as opposed to the ethics world where I thought I was going to end up.
And when you started working with children in that setting, in a palliative care setting, what was that like for you, building those relationships with children and families when you know that the outcome is not necessarily going to be positive? Were you surprised by the how the children responded and how the wisdom of children? I'm just thinking they have so many times out of the mouth of babes, as the saying goes. And I'm just wondering what kind of wisdom nuggets they shared with you.
Oh, there are a great many. I think that kids always get more than we think they get. Like that's been proven in the medical literature. There's a very famous book called The Private Worlds of Dying Children, where this was published back in 1980, where an anthropologist interviewed children on a leukemia ward. And back in that period of time, thankfully not now, leukemia back then was pretty much invariably fatal. And none of the parents had told their kids that they were dying because they were trying to protect them out of love for them. Yet all the kids that she interviewed understood that, even though they'd never been told. So that says two things to me. One is kids always get more than we think they get. And the second thing is that sometimes when we try to protect each other, we isolate. And so the author coined a term called mutual pretense, where the parents pretended their child was not going to die, and the child pretended they didn't know they were going to die, because if they entered into that space with each other, they knew it made the other one sad. And so what they ended up doing was carrying that burden by themselves. And so I think that's parents, they love their kids to no end. They always do what they think is best. Sometimes what your heart leads you to believe is best might actually lead to more isolation and more aloneness. And so walking with families to try to help them enter into that space is a big deal. Another thing that comes to mind is that when a physician tells a parent, I'm pretty sure your child is not going to survive, or in whatever framing, and the parent says, well, we got to keep fighting, we got to keep working, some people are like, well, that parent, they just don't get it. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure they get it. I think parents get a lot more than we give them credit for too. It just means that you can acknowledge that that is highly likely. You can acknowledge that is near certain that this is your kid you're talking about. And I say that a lot to my colleagues when we are treating a kid in a way that they say, well, I would never do that. I would never keep treating my child in this situation. And I always look at them a little funny and be like, you sure about that? Because like, I'm a palliative care doc. I do this for a living. I have 4 kids. If one of my kid got a serious diagnosis, I'd be like, let's treat this thing all the way. Right. So
Right.
we never really know what we're going to do until we're doing it. And then
Mm-hmm.
that might surprise us.
Mm-hmm. Um, how did your understanding of compassion evolve? Not just towards others through your work, but towards yourself?
That's a great question. Um, well, in terms of toward others, I think that it has taken a while for me to realize what real palliative care is about. When I first started, it's a specialty. It has a knowledge base. We do a lot of work with symptom management. We do a lot of work with advanced care planning. We're very facile with, forms that need to be completed in order to document this, that, and the other. And I kind of looked at that as the real part of palliative care, and then the more sort of softer skills, if you will, being present, listening. I didn't think that that was unimportant. I just didn't think that was central. Now
Mhm.
I kind of think that's central. There's an old saying in spiritual care, kind of flips the standard saying on its ear and says, "Don't just do something, stand there." And I think that there's a lot of that in palliative care. So, in terms of the work, it's that. The other part, and the second part of your question about compassion towards myself, which is that one of my favorite quotes, which I mentioned in the book, is from Rita Mae Brown. And she said, good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment.
Okay.
And I kind of look at that as one of my life mottos because I think I have a fair amount of experience, which I just told you where that comes from. So there are times when I wish I had done things differently. There are times when I say something that I wish I could just pull those words back and do it all over again. We do a lot of simulation now in medical education. We didn't do that when I was training, but where we have actors or standardized patients, and you're allowed to rewind in a simulation. You could be like, okay, stop. I'm going to go back 10 seconds. You can't do that in real life. I really wish you could.
Mhm.
But I'm continually struck by the generosity of spirit of the patients I work with and their families. I really do believe that if your heart's in the right place, people see that. And even if you don't execute the way you wish you had, that they'll give you credit for admitting that you didn't do such a great job, or you don't actually get a rewind, but you get a second chance, or a third.
Mhm.
And that has allowed me to maybe be a little bit more gentle with myself.
Mm. The presence of grace when in death and dying, I think um, is incredibly powerful. And you write about moments of deep loss and unexpected grace. Was there a particular chapter or memory for you that was hardest to revisit, yet you felt it was essential that you share it?
Um, I think that the hardest chapter for me to write was actually not about a patient. Most of the book, the vast majority, is about patients I've treated. The hardest chapter was when I wrote about the very sudden and unexpected death of my best friend, um, and um, how hard that was to support his 3 kids, who I sort of look at as 3 kind of my kids too now, and his wife, and then my kids. He was their godfather. And I think it was hard on a couple of levels. So one was this was not me walking along and helping someone else in their grief. It was my grief too, in the midst of me having responsibility toward others that I care about. And it also, at various points as I was writing, I felt like I was maybe doing something wrong by including that chapter. The title of the book is about kids healing a doctor's soul and the loss of a child. Like, I can't really imagine anything worse than losing one's child. And here I am talking about my own loss. And one of the things that I came to understand in the conversations I had with the parents, and I talk about this in the book as well, is that the bereaved parents that I've spoken with, they don't need to have a corner on the sadness market. They don't come at you and be like, you don't know what sadness, like, I've never heard that from any of them. They just don't want people to suffer. And even if somebody says, oh, this is the worst day that I could ever imagine, and they're thinking inside like, oh gosh, there's a lot worse days that I can imagine, they don't come down hard on that person. They try to help that person because they just want to make the world hurt a little bit less.
Yeah.
And that was, maybe going back to your previous question, maybe that's a bit of compassion for myself too, that I didn't ever feel like I had to ask forgiveness from the parents for inserting one of my own stories into this book. Their response was mostly, that must have been really hard for you, and are you okay? That's how big their hearts are.
That's incredibly beautiful. I feel like sometimes we categorize grief and we separate it out, and people try to give like a level of intensity. And I've seen that in the bereavement community, and I feel like that separates us from each other. That we are unable to comfort each other if we only associate with people who have the same type of loss that we've experienced. And I'm not surprised that those bereaved parents were worried about you. What part of what you've learned from being a palliative care physician and learning from these children, what part of that did you take when you were grieving your best friend?
I think that, well, it helped me. My knowledge helped me with my own kids, because at the time, because this was about 10 years ago now, so my kids would have been roughly 4, 8, 10, and 12. So my knowledge helped me understand what they were likely feeling and how they were responding and how normal their responses were. Because the 4-year-old grieved differently than the 12-year-old, as they should have, because they were not the same age and they were doing different things. And I think that I allowed myself, when the dust settled a little bit, and when I say that, I mean I needed to tell 2 of my friends' kids that he had died, and then I needed to tell all 4 of my kids. So I had things I needed to do for the people I loved. And then when I felt like I had done what I needed to do in that moment, and it was now time to let myself start feeling things, I don't think I was intimidated by the feelings. I think I had come close enough to intense grief, because I would never equate what I experienced to that of a bereaved parent. And I sometimes say that I live in a grief adjacent space, that my grief is not the same as a parent's grief, but I'm close enough that I can kind of get a sense of what that is. And I've seen what they were able to endure and cope with on some level. And so I felt like that gave me the willingness to let those feelings come, as opposed to feeling like they were so foreign that I didn't know what to do with them and I was going to try to tamp them down.
Mm-hmm. So you were able to sit with your own pain. Did your children must have been affected by that as well, in seeing that you were being open with your sadness, and maybe giving them permission to be more open with their own grief.
I hope so. I think they're, I'm a dad who cries, so they're sort of used to that. Like, certainly far less momentous circumstances. So I think that we try to encourage them to be honest with their feelings, and also to, we say to them, my wife and I do a lot, like, feelings are what you feel. Like, it doesn't have anything to do with whether you're a good person or a bad person, you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing, or whether they're good or bad. Like, there's no judgment here. Like, you feel what you feel. How you respond to that, then you have some agency. But I never wanted them to feel like they couldn't feel the way they felt. And, in that moment, I talk about this a little bit in the book, they were just doing what they needed to do. Like, my son, who at the time was 10, he went straight to his video games. After a big cry, he went straight to his video games, not because he didn't care, but because that's how he copes. And especially as a 10-year-old. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, we all cope in our own way. And I think the key to coping is the fact that it keeps you going. And then you find the other times when you might have a chance to step back and figure out, what else do I need to do right now? But in the moment, you do what you need to do to make it through.
Hey guys, Kelly here. I wanted to jump in and let you know that you can find out more about my work by visiting my website at kellybuckley.com, or you can find my books on Amazon. Okay, back to the episode. I love that you have a quiet reverence in how you speak about death, not as an ending, but as a sacred transition. I think that's incredibly accurate and beautiful. How has that shaped your relationship with the living?
Oh, I think that if my wife were on this conversation, she would jump in right about now and be like, "This is why he does everything." So, like, we have a shared family calendar, and my wife has just gotten used to, like, things popping up on the calendar, like crazy stuff that we do with our family, because I'm like, life feels really short, and feels very precarious. I've worked with enough people, and also with my friend, to know that there's no guarantees about tomorrow. And so I tend not to put things off. And also, I tend, or at least try not to leave things unsaid. So that if I feel something for somebody, or I appreciate something about somebody, or somebody means something to me, I think there's a pretty decent chance they know that because I've told them that. Because the whole thing of, like, I'll get around to that those words don't really make a ton of sense to me anymore. I'm not sure there's anything that we're guaranteed to get around to.
Yeah, so true. What role did your faith and the sense of the divine play in your journey? How did that help you when you were working with families?
Well, I think that probably the biggest thing that I think about when I think about that is the experience that I had as a parish priest. So I was a parish priest for about 4 years. And the role of a parish priest in the midst of suffering is to be present and to companion people on a difficult road. The role of a physician is a lot different. Like, it doesn't mean that there's none of that, but I often say that physicians are fix-it people, which, like, it's a good thing. I'm not criticizing that. Like, I broke my foot last year, and I went to an orthopedic surgeon, and he's a really nice guy. And he said, "I'm really sorry that you broke your foot." And I was like, "Thank you." And I'm like, "Now can we move on to you fixing it?" Because, like, I appreciate the empathy, but if all he did was like, "Man, it must be really hard to have a broken foot," I'd be like, "Dude, you got to do something for me. I need something more than just empathy." So I appreciate that about physicians. At the same time, the downside of that is, if there's nothing left for us to fix, or nothing left that we can fix, then we need to figure out what to do next. Because sometimes we feel like, what am I supposed to be doing? Because the one thing I am called to do, I can't do. That was driven home to me a long time ago. I was doing my chaplaincy internship when I was in seminary, and there was a surgeon who got very close to a family, was a really dedicated person, had to do multiple surgeries on pediatric patient, and the patient died during one of the surgeries. And he told the family in a very heartfelt way that their child had died. And he actually stepped over the mother's body she was on the floor writhing in pain, and he stepped over her to leave the room. And at the time I was infuriated. And looking back, I'm not infuriated. I think I understand, which is he felt responsible. That not that he had killed the child, but he had not saved the child. And he didn't know what to do with that. Like, could that have been handled better? Of course. Was he a callous person? Absolutely not. He just didn't know what to do with it. And so for me, I've spent time in a situation where nobody looked at me for a fix. They didn't expect me as a priest to do anything other than be present. So when there's nothing practical left for me to do, I think that my priest side comes out, and maybe hopefully wins out over the fix-it doctor side, and lets me at least try to remain present without feeling like I failed or that I need to be doing something else.
Can you speak to our audience about some of the most profound wisdom that that children that you've cared for have shared with you that has floored you?
Well, I think that when I think about that, like one of the patients, in the book, most of the chapters are devoted to a single patient, and there's one patient, one of my favorite patients. I've said that twice now, just as a confession. Like, doctors aren't supposed to have favorite patients, but I think we all have favorite patients if we're honest about it. And one of the patients I had was a girl named Grace, who had been dealing with a very bad kind of cancer for several years when I met her when she was about 15. And her oncologists were amazing and kept coming up with new treatments. And finally, they ran out of treatments. And it was very clear that she was going to die not too far off from her disease. And this was the summer before her senior year of high school. And her class was going to go on a trip to Europe. She desperately wanted to go. And there was just no way we could pull that off. Like, her pain was so bad, like a plane flight and cobblestone roads. Like, it was a lovely vision, but it was destined for not good outcomes. Mm-hmm. And so we told her that, and she rapidly had a very intense pain crisis. And in palliative care, we use a term called total pain, which is not just physical, but it's emotional and social and spiritual. And they all fit together, and it's hard to tease out exactly which one is causing what sometimes, because it just means somebody hurts. And I'll always remember she said she was in a ton of pain. She's like, I need some IV pain meds. And I said, like, I think we can do oral pain meds. It'll be quicker for you to get home. And she's like, but we got into this real back and forth where she's like, you've always told me over the years that I know my body best, and I'm telling you I'm in pain. And finally, when she kept pushing, she said, why won't you give me what I'm asking for? And I remember saying to her, I said, because medicine can't heal a broken heart. But she wasn't like, oh, good point, Bob. Thank you for enlightening me. She just was still really upset with me. And I went home that day and I was like, I don't know if I did the right thing. To this day, I don't know if I did the right thing. Like, that's a pretty good turn of phrase, but maybe a better doctor would have been like, right now, I just need you to not feel terrible. The lesson that I learned, though, was when I went back the next day, and I was like, we've been working together for a long time. We were pretty tight. Like, I'd gone to see some of her drama performances in high school. Like, I knew her really well. And I walked in her room and I was like, I don't know if she's gonna want anything to do with me anymore after yesterday. And we just picked up where we left off. And the thing that taught me was that if your heart's in the right place, people will cut you a lot of slack if you keep showing up. And did she think I did the right thing the day before? No, but she knew I cared about her, and she knew I was showing up again, and she knew we'd have other conversations. And that's a generosity of spirit that I don't think I had experienced very much before.
So you've witnessed countless final moments. What have these moments taught you about life? Not necessarily, just as a general observation. What would you say to that?
This is a bit of a dangerous thing to say, I suppose, because it can come off as flippant, which is not the intention. But that to say that there can be beauty in dying can come very perilously close to saying it's not so bad to die, or maybe that's not the worst thing in the entire world, or something like that, that comes across as dismissive and overlooks the fact, like, I want to reinforce what I said earlier, like, no kid should ever suffer, no kid definitely should ever die. Like, it's just wrong. So I'm not
Right.
saying it's good in the grand scheme or on balance, but can there be some beauty in death? I would venture to say yes. And especially with the video calls that I made with these parents to remember their children, that really came through for me. And some of the times it had been a decade since their child had died. And the way they talked about it, there was a patient who was compassionately extubated, meaning that we removed the breathing tube because he had a degenerative condition, and his parents felt like this was not right for him to be what they consider to be dependent on medical technology. Um, it was a remarkable day. They wanted him to be baptized. He was a baby. And they asked the nurses, because they weren't churchgoers, they were like, do you know anyone who could baptize? And they're like, actually, there's this guy who does double duty sometimes, which I don't usually, but I did that day. And it was a really amazing day because his mom had never been baptized. So she's like, well, if you're baptizing him, could you baptize me? And then they brought in his older sister who was 6. And she was like, why don't I get this? So we actually did 3 baptisms in this hospital room. And then they removed the breathing tube later that day. And his dad told me this thing that really has always stuck with me. He said that after they removed the breathing tube, and up until then, even if you're used to something, it's still odd to have your baby be on a breathing machine. They're hooked up to things. You can sort of hold them, but it takes a ton of work to hold them because you can't afford to dislodge anything. And so he picked up his son and held him after he had died. And the thing that he always told me was that he actually had a mirror. And so he set up the mirror so he could see himself holding his son. And he said, like, 10 years later, he doesn't have to work at all to remember that image. Like, it's like embedded in his mind, that image of him holding his son. And I've always thought back on that to say that they made a courageous decision to not go down a path of a lot of intervention that they felt was not right. They made a decision out of love for their baby. And, do I wish that the outcome had been totally different? Do I wish that this young boy had not had this condition? Absolutely. But given that he did, they made incredibly hard choices. And then they have this moment that they will always remember, and they carry with them.
That's just so beautiful. I'm sorry, I'm a little speechless by that. Just kind of picturing him holding his child.
I can add a little nice story on top of that to give you a second. So the book came out in June, and I had let all the families involved in the book obviously know that the book was coming out. And most of the stories happened in Vermont, where I worked up until about 8 years ago. And so we go back to Vermont for a couple of weeks every summer. And this year was a very busy year because I had a chance to visit with about 8 of the families from the book, some of whom I hadn't seen in person for a long, long time. And so that family, we got together with, it's a longer story, with some other folks for a picnic. And so they brought their daughter, who I baptized when she was 6. She's now 18. So we got a chance to reconnect. And we took a lot of photos and remembered Ryder, who was her brother, who died. And It doesn't mean that the grief goes away, like it never goes away, but to come back together and also to take that active step of remembering him that much later, and also realizing that whoever happens to pick up the book gets a chance to know a writer too. It's pretty special.
That is special. Palliative care is it's such a unique place in how practitioners form relationships. I remember when I was in nursing school, and um, a professor said, you have to have a very professional, your responsibility is to take care of, this was years ago, your responsibility is to take care of the patient and not kind of insert yourself or become part of their story. And when I moved into oncology, I realized that it was very important to build a relationship with people when you were there with them day after day, and that you could still present and be very professional in your delivery of care, um, while building that relationship with them. Um, what do you say to practitioners who have trouble kind of wrapping their mind around that?
Yeah, I think we've come a long way in medical education. Like, I came through the physician track, you came through the nursing track, so I think those are distinct in many ways. I think that the old school idea about maintaining sort of a sense of professionalism, or total equanimity, to use a famous term, in that regard, I don't think that's as much an issue as it used to be. And so I think that the younger generation of trainees is probably not getting the kind of crisp boundaries that you and I got when we trained. At the same time, it's interesting. I think people go through a trajectory, which is to the degree that you're taught boundaries, you oftentimes start off adhering to them very, very closely. And then
Mm-hmm.
as you get older, you begin to understand that I'm not going to say rules are made to be broken, but rules are there as guideposts, if you will, or safeguards that aren't always reliable. And so my experience, I'm 58 now, when I talk to my peers, is that sometimes we feel a little judged by the younger generation for how we blur some boundaries, and people are like, don't you realize that was a boundary violation? I'm like, well, I think I stepped over a boundary. Violation is kind of a harsh term, and so I think that we're doing better about allowing people to be human. And then I think also the older you get, and maybe the more experience you have from that bad judgment I mentioned before, you kind of realize what mistakes you made before. And then maybe you feel like, when you're able to cross a boundary that feels right in that moment, not as a general rule, but in that moment.
Mm-hmm. How do you hope that your memoir will serve others who are navigating their own grief, or their own transformation?
Well, I think my hope is that for those, a lot of people don't know anything about pediatric palliative care, which makes sense. Like, thankfully, most people who are approaching the end of their life are not kids. That's the way it should be. Like, nobody should be a kid approaching the end of their life. So I hope that it kind of gives people a better sense of what pediatric palliative care in particular, or palliative care in general, is. As you said in sort of the intro, it's more about living than dying. Um, so I hope for that. I also hope that it opens up avenues of conversation about what is important in life, how we care about each other. It also, from a kind of metaphysical or spiritual perspective, it attempts to grapple with pretty profound questions, not necessarily coming up with nice, pat answers, sometimes not coming up with answers at all. And so I'm hoping that would allow people to enter into that exploration for themselves, which I think people who are people of faith of whatever variety oftentimes grapple with.
Mm-hmm. If you could sit beside your younger self, perhaps a version of you when you just entered medicine, what would you say to him about the road ahead?
You have great questions. I have to reflect. I think I would say that some of the stuff that seems really important right now isn't, and some of the stuff that doesn't seem important right now will turn out to be. Um, and you're going to have to figure this out for yourself. Like, I wish I could go back and be like, here's the one thing you don't know. And if you know it now, then you will avoid all the mistakes that come up, or you'll avoid having these things. And I don't think that's actually possible. Like, the lessons that I feel like I've learned over the last 10 or 20 years, if I were to go back, if you had like a reel, like an REEL of my life, I'm pretty sure somebody had told me that stuff at some point along the way, maybe more than once. But there's a difference between somebody, even your future self, telling you something and actually living it. And until you live it, you probably don't get it. So I think that if my younger self met my older self, he would be like, tell me all the answers. And my older self would be like, I think telling you isn't going to work so good. I think you're gonna have to live into these answers on your own. But like, I feel incredibly blessed. And you never know where you will end up. And a lot of people think medicine is a very, especially the physician track, is a very linear path, like, and in some ways it is. Like, it's very prescriptive, if you will. Like, you got to go to medical school, you got to do residency. The bottom line is, like, I ended up in a specialty that was a word I hadn't even heard when I was training. So that says that there's a bit of surprise. So if I were to say to my younger self, you're going to end up in a place that you can't even conceive of, I think my younger self would be like all worked up about that, to be like, that's really uncomfortable. I need to know what's happening. And I would be like, and it'll be okay.
And it will be okay. You're right. There's just certain wisdom that you can only get from lived experience. And I mean, I think some of the wisdom that I hope I have probably came from the biggest face plants that that I had in my life,
Yes.
that taught me such valuable lessons. Um, in this season of your life, what does beautiful mean to you? And how do you see it reflected in the broken places of our world?
I appreciate you bringing it back to the broken places, because I think that I've thought about this a lot, especially given the level of discourse in our current world, where there's a lot of certainty that whoever's speaking believes that they're right. And it feels like a lot of judgment for people who don't believe however that person believes. I've always, my personality type or whatever is such that I've always sort of wept with the sad folks more than I've rejoiced with the happy ones. Like, that's just my personality. Like, this is a bit of a tangent, but I think it speaks to your point. When I went back to school about 10 years ago and did a writing degree, and it was weird, to be in my 40s and going back to school. And I was sort of taken back to college days, and we would eat in the dining hall of this, I was living in a dorm when I was there. And you come out of the dining hall into the cafeteria, and there's a ton of people sitting there. And I can remember back to when I was in college, I was like, who am I going to sit with? I don't want to sit alone, all that kind of stuff. And so I knew people, and I had friends and all this kind of stuff. But I was aware of the fact that I was always, it was almost like if there was someone sitting by themselves, it was almost like there was a big, like, spotlight on them in my mind. Like, why are they by themselves? Are they okay? And I think my kids inherited that from me, which is just sort of really resonating with the people who are having a hard time. And I just think that there is something wonderful about seeing that, or at least inquiring about that. Like someone could just be, to take that rather mundane example, someone could be eating by themselves because they need some time alone, right? Like it's not like they're lonely. But there's something wonderful about inquiring. There's something wonderful about noticing. And even if someone's like, I'm good, I'm hoping that the times that I would go over and be like, can I sit with you? Or are you looking for company? Or would you like to join us? I'd like to believe that that meant something to them just in that moment. So I think we're so focused in many ways of getting more for ourselves, or whether that's reassurance that we're right, or surrounding ourselves by people who believe like-mindedly, that I would love to think of a world where we all go about looking around and noticing the people who are struggling, as opposed to trying to glom on to the people who are doing just fine.
Mm. I love that, um, that feeling that you can make a difference by just allowing someone to be seen. Um, you meet people, you don't know what their struggle is. Like you said, maybe he just wanted to eat lunch alone. Um, but perhaps I'm thinking about my son, when he was at college. He was a hockey player and um, sustained a pretty bad concussion, and he found it very difficult to be in social situations as he recovered. And we were hundreds of miles away, and I always thought, I hope there would be a person like Bob to sit with him at lunch if he couldn't sit with his friends. Um, we've lost the ability to be curious about each other, and then we can't. We're just being fed information, and so we're not making inquiries that allow us to learn and allow us to come together as community. Um, how do we fix that?
So we come back. I'm a doctor. I'm a fix-it person, right? Like I should try to figure out a way to fix it. I, I don't know. I think that curiosity is a great word that you used, to which I think is a desire to, or a hope of understanding more about somebody without predetermining who they are. Um, my first and best therapist had a very, he would say this a lot. He sort of boiled down, I think I have the right word, like relationships, like nurturing relationships, especially for whether it be friends or as a parent to a child, as enthusiasm. Like to be enthusiastic about the person. Like I don't mean rah rah, like everything's great, but like I'm interested in you. I'm excited for what you can be. I'm excited to know what the future holds for you and for us. Um, and then also, I think that trying to fall back or rely on certain core ideas, like I have to say, one of my sort of guiding principles has really been put to the test, speaking as an American over the last 8 months, which is one of my core ideas is that everybody's doing the best they can with what they got.
Mm.
Um, it's hard sometimes in this day and age to credit people with that. But if we stop, then it's too easy to categorize. It's too easy to label. It's too easy to put adjectives to somebody. This person is whatever negative adjective you want to put on it. And so I hope that through curiosity and enthusiasm and acknowledging that, maybe it's not so great what they're doing, but they are doing the best they can with what they got in the moment. That if we really believe that, I think that lays the foundation for maybe greater sense of community.
Mm. I've actually, every morning I meditate and then I say my prayers. And one of the prayers that I've been saying is, let me see them as children.
Mm-hmm.
I find if I kind of put that lens to it, that because we're all guilty of falling into the trap of, what did he say or what did she do? And when I see people as children, I tend to have a softer interpretation sometimes, and that's been helpful for me anyway, as we navigate this very unique time in history.
I think that's a wonderful way of approaching it.
So, Robert, before we finish, and I am so thankful for this conversation. And I know our listeners are going to just take so much wisdom from it. Can you tell them how they can connect with you and find your book?
Sure. So the book is called Because I Knew You, How Some Remarkable Sick Kids Healed a Doctor's Soul. It's available at various outlets. Local bookstores can order it, Amazon, Powell's, whatever that might be. Very happy if people want to reach out to me. So I have a website, robertmacauley.com, or it might be easier to remember as becauseiknewyou.com is an alternative website that links to the same place. It's got email contact. If people have a desire to be in conversation, I would really enjoy that.
That's lovely. Robert, thank you so much for being a guest and sharing these beautiful children with us. And I wish you all the success that life can bring.
Thank you so much, Kelly. This has been a really beautiful conversation.
Thank you. And we will see you again next time. Thank you, guys. Thank you for joining me today on Broken Beautiful Me. I hope you found today's episode inspiring and insightful. Remember, every scar tells a story, and every story has the power to heal. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. Your support means the world to me, and it helps spread the message of hope and resilience to more people like us. Don't forget to leave a review and share this podcast with your friends and family. Together, we can create a community of strength and beauty in our brokenness. Until next time, stay strong, stay beautiful, and keep shining.